Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thato, we've just gotten off the line with the police minister, and we spoke about various issues regarding the police that are in the headlines. One of them being, just yesterday, we saw peaceful protests from those wanting to bring the attention to the scourge of gender-based violence. Protests made up mainly of young women, students, and the protests in Cape Town getting to a point where police felt the need to use tear gas. Now, we asked the minister about that, and he at least admitted that when it comes to protests, peaceful protests about important issues like this, there really should be no need for the police to use excessive force or heavy-handedness, as what seems to be the case in the visuals we're seeing coming out of Cape Town. But this is not the first time we've seen this kind of behavior from the police, is it?
No, it isn't. And unfortunately, during this COVID-19 period, the issue of police brutality is something that South Africa and people around the world are coming to terms with. Everyone is grappling more and more with the tendency within the police to rely on excessive uses of force. And this reflects a lack of critical skills such as communication, such as de-escalation, and a failure on the part of the police to acknowledge and understand that the right to protest is indeed a right, and that they in fact have a duty to uphold that right. And that means that they actually have to facilitate protests to the best of their capacity.
Now, you have sent out a statement, or your organization has sent out the statement following the awful death of 16-year-old Nathaniel Julies in Eldorado Park, a death that's really been reacted to at the highest level across South Africa, mainly also because this is a young man who one would say is one of the most vulnerable parts of our society. Somebody that really should be protected by all in society, but especially by the police. What is your reaction to what we saw happening in Eldorado Park this week?
So, when we first learned of that tragic death, of course, the first thing is absolute outrage. And then the second thing is, not again. Because unfortunately in this country, we know from viewfinder analysis of IPID data, the police in South Africa kill on average a person every single day. And so while there's been swift action in this case, we absolutely have to be reminded of the fact that some people who perhaps are older than this poor boy, who were not as vulnerable as him. I mean, we understand that he was living with disability. People across the country, particularly in poor, Black and marginalized communities, they have a very particular experience of the police, and that is an experience of a police force that is violent, that polices through violence, that does not acknowledge and respect and uphold their dignity and uphold any of their rights. So it's outrageous. Nathaniel's death is one too many. But if we just think this is August, this month we were commemorating the Marikana Massacre. In 2012, the police shot down 37 minors. And the fact is, from 2012, the police have had an opportunity to change. The police have had an opportunity to take steps in the right direction, to make systemic differences. But instead, we've seen nothing but a continuation in that same sort of violence. And since then, the police have killed over 2,800 people. So these are deaths that are absolutely avoidable. And Nathaniel's death, of course, is tragic and absolutely painful because it should not have happened. It should not have happened at all.
Now the lockdown as a result of the coronavirus has magnified many things, and what it has magnified is that South Africans have experienced this lockdown very unequally, one of them being on the law enforcement front. As you just mentioned, we've always known this, but we've seen it even more so during the pandemic and during the lockdown, that people's relationship with the police is far different in leafy suburbs as compared to their experiences in poorer areas and in townships. And we've seen that time and time again during the pandemic. Just yesterday, I spoke to a researcher from the ISS who did a survey that said quite starkly that the police that they surveyed could not tell the difference between very simple right or wrong ethical scenarios that were put in front of them. How do we change this? Is this education? Is it structural?
Yeah.
Or do we just need to go back to the drawing board and admit that the SAPS is not reformed and is not in keeping with what should be the tenets of democratic South Africa?
You know, I think a lot of what you said hits the nail right on the head. You know, the problem with police brutality in this country is deeply systemic. And unfortunately, that also means that we have leadership that forms an important part of that problem. It isn't too long ago that our very own Minister of Police was denying there was an issue of police brutality to begin with. But the fact is, all the evidence points in a different direction. And a key part of seeing change within the police is that police are actually held accountable. And unfortunately, in this country, we have to pay out millions of rands as a means of holding police accountability. According to the ISS, whom you've just mentioned, in the 2018-2019 financial year, we paid out 535 million rands for police misconduct. And yet only under 1% of 193 SAPS personnel were subjected to formal disciplinary proceedings. So the entire accountability structure within the police is absolutely broken. The police need to be held accountable within the service. IPID should be equipped and able to speedily and transparently and effectively investigate matters that are referred to them. And then the civil proceedings that people go through in order to get a damages payout should be the end of that process. But for many people, they actually just skip the first two steps. And just need a civil payout because they have no trust that the police officer who was responsible for violating them will ever be held accountable, that they'll ever receive justice in any other form. And so the problem in South Africa with the police is deeply systemic. From Marikana, they had an expert panel report that they were a part of. The police were part of that panel. They still have not released that report. And we have to ask ourselves why. And unfortunately, when it comes to the police, a lot of it boils down to political will. There is absolutely no movement. The president can say whatever he wants, but actions speak something else. The Minister of Police, on the one hand, can speak in a very inflammatory fashion oftentimes and can never be held accountable for that. And so that kind of structure, that prevailing structure, trickles down to the officer right at the bottom. And they feel that they are allowed and are protected when they use excessive uses of force against members of the public, which is absolutely frustrating. But yeah,
absolutely frustrating, and unfortunately, there are families that are losing loved ones as a result of that non-action. And the facts do not lie, and the lack of action does not lie either. Thank you so much for that great insight there. That's a researcher with the Socio-Economic Rights Institute of South Africa, Thato Masia-ngwako. Thank you so much for your time.